Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Warehouse. This is a 3-cost action card from Seaside, and it says plus 3 cards, plus 1 action, discard 3 cards. So this card is what we call a sifter or a filterer. The core idea behind this type of card is to help you find better cards in your deck by essentially moving past and discarding the lower quality cards. The reason why you'd want this is to improve your reliability, so it may be that you want to find the villages, the draw cards and all that first, or it can just be that you've got a deck that is absolutely filled with junk and you just want to find the actually good cards so that you can play them more often, right? Just churn through that deck and find the good ones. Cellar from the base game is probably the card that's like this that you will most recognise because it's in the base game, and Warehouse, you know, it's the same sort of card as Cellar. However, there are big differences between Cellar and Warehouse. So, Warehouse draws first and then discards, while with Cellar it's the other way around. Cellar you want to discard, you have to discard first and then you draw. Warehouse is much, much stronger than Cellar. This is because with Cellar, because you discard first, the cards that you then draw up afterwards, they might actually just be as bad as the junk that you just discarded. Whereas with Warehouse, you get to pick the worst 3 cards overall and then discard those. And what that means is that your hand usually looks a lot better after you've used it than it will with Cellar. So the cards that you discard, this can include the 3 that you just drew. Right? It's not just the cards that you start with in your hand. So you are essentially, if you were to play Warehouse like from a 5-card hand, you are essentially picking the worst 3 out of the other 7 cards you've looked at to get rid of. Right? Warehouse, the cards you draw, they go into your hand, and then it doesn't distinguish between any of the cards in your hand and how they got there. You then just pick 3 out of those. Now, what's really important to note with these sort of sifting cards, this is not a real substitute for proper drawing and trashing. Drawing cards and trashing them are much stronger than sifting past bad cards. So you look at a card like Smithy, it just draws you 3 cards. You don't have to discard 3 afterwards, and well, your hand's not going to be any worse as a result. Now, obviously, Warehouse is non-terminal compared to Smithy, right? That's the big difference there. But why, put bad cards in your discard if they can just stay in your hand? Like, oftentimes, drawing is just going to be stronger, right? If those bad cards were coppers and you draw them, you actually get to play them, whereas with Warehouse, you have to discard them, and so you don't get the money out of them. Of course, it's all very well and good saying that, you would much rather draw cards and, trash the junk instead of having to, keep sifting past them, but you don't always get to do that, right? Dominion, there's a lot of variety in it, and sometimes you just don't have these cards available to you, and Warehouse is really the best thing that you've got, right? You can't trash the junk. Well, you've got to deal with it somehow. Maybe just skipping over it is the best that you can do. However, this isn't to say that Warehouse is bad if you have trashing and draw. It still has use in games without them. It is just worth noting that if you had a choice between getting a sifting card and having supported draw in your deck, you're usually going to be better off with the draw or the trashing, right? That's just something to keep in mind, right? These sort of sifting cards are usually not powerhouses, but they are still useful. So, with Warehouse, when you play it, your hand size goes down by 1. And if you want to draw every card in your deck, that means that after you have discarded some cards, you're going to have to draw them back up again anyway. Remember, Warehouse is not a draw card, right? It is, if you have to discard good cards, you still need to get to the end of your draw and then trigger a shuffle and draw those cards back up if you want to play them. In fact, because your hand size goes down when you play Warehouse, this is kind of similar to any other sort of stop card, like a silver or a gold, right? They just eat up space in your hand. So when I talk about draw cards and how effective they are in these videos, I refer to a concept that I call stop card space. And that is basically like how many extra stop cards you can support when you add draw to your deck. So Laboratory adds 1 extra stop card space to your deck. Right. Now, it is worth noting that if you are trying to draw your entire deck, then Warehouse is actually using up a stop card space. So if you add a lot of warehouses, you will find that you actually start to struggle to get good turns because you just can't keep a good hand size up. Right. With all these warehouses that you're playing, you're having to draw the warehouses. Right, and if you don't want to play the warehouse, then it's just eating up a slot in your hand. And if you do play it, after a certain point, you're just going to have like a lot of really good cards in your hand. And then, what are you going to discard? Are you going to discard other warehouses? That sounds pretty bad to me. So, when considering what you need to draw your deck, bear in mind that warehouse is not drawing you cards. Even though it's got a big +3 cards written on it, right? It is not doing that for you. Now, everything that I just said there, of course, was kind of assuming that you are actually planning to draw your entire deck. We talk about that a lot in these videos, but in reality, in Dominion, you're not always drawing every card every turn, right? It's the ideal, and it's very strong if you can. But sometimes, decks just aren't set up for it. The cards are not available to make it work. They're the draw's just not that good, for example. If you're not planning to actually draw back up the cards that you discard from Warehouse, then you don't actually need any draw in your deck to support drawing them back up again, right? You can actually get away sometimes with just not having enough draw to draw all of your cards and still get to the end of your deck with a clean shuffle. You've just got some cards that you've decided, I'm not playing these, right, and they're in your discard pile. And this can be pretty useful when you start to get to the late game and you start adding provinces to your deck. So even if you've got a really nice deck that's very thin and doesn't have any junk in it, at some point you're going to start adding these bad, stop cards, like province. They're not bad, they're just unplayable, right? And if you want your deck to continue to be reliable and still run at its maximum efficiency, usually before you start adding all the victory cards, you need to prepare by getting some overdraw. Right, you actually have more draw than you need, so that when you start adding these cards, you can continue to draw your deck. But Warehouse is nice in that you kind of don't need to have the overdraw if you're just prepared to say, I'm not going to draw everything. I'm going to stick these cards in my discard that are hopefully the provinces, and then just not draw them up. And so, you'd think about Warehouse being a stop card, like I said before, but if you're not going to draw up those other 3 cards, then Warehouse has actually prevented your need to draw another 3 cards. So it's actually made drawing your deck and getting to the end of your shuffle easier rather than harder, and that's something that's important to note about this type of card, in that once you start getting more junk than you want to be drawing, Warehouse can actually really help you continue to get through your deck, and it's sort of not getting away. You still don't want too many of them. It's important to note because how much junk are you going to have? You really got 6 or 9? How many do you really need? But, you can get away with not overdrawing when you have these sifters like Warehouse available. So another big difference with Warehouse and Cellar is that Cellar lets you pick the exact number of cards that you want to discard and draw. And that gives you a lot of fine control over managing your shuffles. So in the Cellar video, it's the first video I ever did, I talk a lot about shuffle management and using Cellar to get you exactly to the end of your shuffle and stuff. That's still relevant for Warehouse, so I would recommend watching that video if you haven't. But there is a lot less control that you get with Warehouse. With Warehouse, you are always drawing exactly 3, and you are always discarding exactly 3. Now, this, in theory, is worse than Cellar's best-case scenario, right? Cellar can discard and draw quite a lot of cards with just one Cellar play if you already have a large hand size. But bear in mind that these best-case scenarios for Cellar are quite hard to pull off sometimes, and they can be rare, right? You have to have drawn your deck well enough and got a really big hand size, and then be in a situation to play Cellar afterwards. it's not very easy necessarily. As a card meant to add reliability, right? You have to have already drawn like half of your deck before cellar starts to get really, really good, which just isn't going to happen sometimes. Warehouse is much more generally useful. You can play it better when your hand size is smaller than you can with cellar, so you can start playing it a lot more effectively at the start of your turn rather than like mid-turn after you've already drawn a bunch of cards. It's just way more likely to be useful and stronger than cellar is, even though cellar in theory can be a lot better. Now the downside is that you miss a lot of this precise control, and so you really want to avoid these bad shuffles with Warehouse. If I have discarded like 3 provinces and I've got a discard pile with 3 provinces in, I don't want to draw like 1 card into that shuffle, because if I trigger a new shuffle and draw 1, well, now I've got 2 provinces on the top of my deck, and that's really bad if I start my next turn with 2 provinces in my hand. What this means is that sometimes you have to look at how much draw is left, and if you don't have enough to trigger the shuffle and actually draw through it, you might have to just stop playing any cards that have like plus card on it. So if you have a bunch of cantrips that could be cantrip coins like merchant or something, or even just like regular villages, you might have to consider not actually playing all of them if you want to avoid a bad shuffle. Now bear in mind, the more warehouses you add, the worse this starts to get. Like if you have 2 warehouses, you can end up with a 6-card discard pile that is potentially full of a lot of really, really bad cards. And 6 is a nasty number to have in a discard pile, because if you just draw one of those cards, you've now got a 5-card draw pile, which makes up like an entire starting hand that could be absolutely awful cards. It's just coppers, it's estates, it's provinces, and you basically kill your next turn. So again, I talk about this a lot more in depth in the cellar video, so if you're wondering a little bit more about this, you should go check that out. But this is key to note that sometimes with Warehouse, if you are not planning to draw all of those cards back up, you might actually just not have to play all of your markets or something, right? You just don't do it. Don't trigger the shuffle, right? Even if your turn has to be slightly worse as a result, because you won't kill your next turn completely dead. So Warehouse costs 3. Does that mean we want to open with it? If you get a 3-4 opening split, you could totally buy a Warehouse, right? Is that a good idea? Well, sometimes you have decks where there's just a really important card and you want to play it as often as possible. So it could be that you've got a trash card like Sentry or Trading Post or whatever, or you've got a card like Sea Hag that you can get early and you just want to junk your opponent very quickly. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to play a card as often as possible. It's not just trashing and junk. There are other examples, but I'm not going to list a whole load of examples. It is worth noting that if you open with Warehouse alongside some kind of silver equivalent, that includes silver itself, but maybe like militia, right? Just something that's like giving you 2 money. As long as you actually see the silver in the turn where you play Warehouse, you are going to hit 5, even if you draw all 3 of your estates. Now, of course, I'm talking about like turn 3 or 4 here, but this is really important to note. When you open Silver Warehouse, you have a 12-card deck in turns 3 and 4. And when you play Warehouse, you will have seen 8 of those cards. So as long as Silver wasn't in the other 4, which is just 1/3 of your deck, after playing Warehouse, you will have the Silver and 3 coppers in your 4-card hand. And that gets you to 5. It's also worth noting that Warehouse, of course, is non-terminal. So you won't get terminal collision as opposed to using something else like Smithy. So Warehouse can be a really good opener for a terminal like Moneylender or Militia, right? Moneylender, you want to play it as often as you can early to trash those nasty coppers. And Warehouse, if you draw it alongside Moneylender, you still get to play it. You still get to match up Moneylender with your coppers. And of course, Moneylender is a silver equivalent. So you will be guaranteed to hit 5 as long as you actually see the Moneylender on the same turn that you play Warehouse. It is worth noting that you do actually trigger a shuffle on turn 4 as long as you see your warehouse on turn 3 or 4. So we talked about this a little bit in the Smithy video, but it's sort of important there in the fact that Smithy actually gives you these really strong turns as well. This is not so bad when you trigger a shuffle on turn 4. It might feel like you've drawn 1 card into a shuffle, and you've just triggered this new shuffle. Now you've got 5 cards. And, they are going to be stuff like estates and coppers in there. But it's not always bad that you trigger this shuffle on turn 4, because your turn 3 purchase will be in there somewhere. And that means that the card that you bought on turn 3, you're guaranteed to see it by turn 4. You might actually see it on turn 4. You're guaranteed to see it no later than turn 5, not turn 4. Sorry. And your other opening buy, you're guaranteed to see before turn 5. So this, can really help you start playing your other cards that you get early, very quickly. Sometimes, if you get unlucky and you don't have something like Warehouse, if you buy a card on turn 3, you might not actually see it until turn 7. But with Warehouse, you will absolutely see it by turn 5. And it depends on what you're buying. So a card like Trading Post or Sentry, where you have to hit 5 and then play it, you want to be getting them early and playing them early. And so guaranteeing that basically you get to play it by turn 5 if you bought it on turn 3, that can be really good. Of course, none of this is actually guaranteed, because Warehouse might actually only show up on turn 5. It might be one of the bottom 2 cards of your deck, and well, that just happens in Dominion sometimes. Right, there's nothing you can do about it. So Warehouse, it's helping you hit 5 as long as you open it with a silver equivalent, and it is cycling through your deck, so you are playing and seeing your cards that you're buying much earlier. So that sounds really good. But it is worth noting that Warehouse isn't necessarily actually making your deck better unless the other cards that you're buying are making up for that. Right, again, Warehouse is not draw. It is not like Smithy, where now you've got this draw card in your deck that you're going to be using throughout the game. It is just zooming through the cards in your deck. And if all you're doing is just pushing through cards and not really achieving much else, you are kind of just spinning your wheels. Part of the whole point of cycling through a deck is to actually play the other cards more often. But if the other cards aren't that good, or they're more warehouses or something, what are you actually achieving, right? And remember, your hand size goes down when you play warehouse. So theoretically, you are actually going to have a worse turn when you play warehouse, and you're trying to make up for that by speeding through your deck, right? This is not building your deck in the same way that you do with Smithy or Silvers and all that, right? It is just running through your deck more quickly. So with Warehouse, you can think of it that you are kind of sacrificing a bit of maximum potential, if you open with it early on, in order to be a lot more consistent and to also play cards more often. And you have to decide, based on what else is on the kingdom, whether or not that's something that you really want. And if it is, then Warehouse might be a good open for you. So opening Warehouse is bad when losing hand size is bad, or you really, really need some form of economy and you're not buying silver because you're buying Warehouse instead. So you wouldn't open Warehouse alongside, say, Chapel, because even though that's a card you think you want to play as soon as possible, if you only have a 4-card hand size, you're going to trash one less card with Chapel. And in addition to that, Chapel needs you to find some way of generating economy, because you are going to start trashing those coppers really, really fast. Right. Sometimes you do actually have to buy silver, because you need to buy cards you want. The cards might be quite expensive, or you're trashing really fast. And Warehouse is very good at a certain point of consistently generating you these low-earning turns if you're not careful, because you are having this lower hand size, right, and you're not building with it. So this is the thing you've got to watch out for with Warehouse, right, just because if the trashing is too good, then you can actually end up screwing yourself over. And let's be honest, if you're thinning really quickly, once your deck is really thin, what do you need warehouse for at that point, right? Like, you surely could have bought something better, like even a silver at that time. So, now we've talked a lot there about the opening for warehouse. It actually most of the time continues to have use throughout the game, right? Just because you're not opening with warehouse doesn't mean that you're never going to buy it at some point. And if you do buy it early, you're still going to keep using it, right? It can save your turns from bad draws. It gives you reliability. You don't have to just have junk in your deck in order for warehouse to be useful. Remember, there are usually cards that you want to draw last. Your payload, like your bridges, your silvers, or whatever. If you are planning to draw those cards out of your discard and actually draw your deck, it is fine to have a warehouse and discard them and essentially do the equivalent of bottom decking them, right? That actually adds a lot to your reliability. So warehouse can be good even with no junk. And of course, eventually at some point, you're most likely going to be adding these unplayable victory cards, and hey, they are great for discarding to warehouse, right? So even if there's like this mid-game part of the game where warehouse is not looking so good, at some point it's most likely it's going to get good again. So it is fine to like use warehouse throughout the game, honestly. Like it's fairly useful. Of course, we have to mention it because it's a discard card. Sometimes discarding is actually useful. It's seen as a disadvantage for these sorts of cards, like that's how they're balanced, but there are some cards where discarding is actually really positive for you. Now, there are obvious combos like cards that actively react to being discarded, like Tunnel and Village Green. Some cards don't mind you having lower hand sizes, so if you really need to get the village effect from Diplomat, for example, you've got to lower your hand size somehow, and hey, Warehouse does that for you, and it really helps you find the Diplomat as well, so it can be great for that. And Minion is always leaving you at a 4-card hand, so if you have to discard down to a 3-card hand in order to find your next minion, that is fine, because it's going to draw you back up to a 4-card hand after you play Minion. And draw to X cards are good. They get choked up on treasures and victory cards, and it's nice to have a way to get them out of your hand so you can be doing the other things that you want to do, like playing the festivals. And of course there are trash cards that trash from your deck rather than your hand, like Lookout and Sentry, and you can set them up if you can draw your deck by putting cards you want to trash in your discard, and then after like making your way towards the end of your shuffle, you can play them and have them peek into your discard, and you know what cards are in there. So this is sort of some overlap with other cards we've talked about. That's why I'm just rushing through this slide, but I have to mention it for completeness with this sort of card. But, you know, I spend a bit more on these examples in like the Cellar video, for example. So just a summary of key points with Warehouse. So you can add it to engines to get some reliability. It can help you find and play your good cards in junk-filled decks where you've got this big disparity in the quality of your cards. You don't want to be playing the curses, the estates. You would much rather have the other cards in your deck instead, in your hand, sorry. You've got to be really careful with bad shuffles. You get a lot less control than you do with Cellar, so you've got to take extra special attention to what you're doing there. Don't get too many. You can struggle to draw your deck, or you can be forced to just start discarding really good cards that you would rather be playing, and you can actually tank your deck if you just get too many warehouses. Like 1 is fine, 2 is fine, 3's pushing it a bit. Do you have more than 3 warehouses? Like, oh, I don't know, man. Like, you don't see it very often. Like, watch out, don't get too many. It is fine as an opener if you want to play a key card as often as possible. You need to open it alongside a silver equivalent if you actually want to hit 5 and also open with it, but you get pretty good odds of hitting 5 if you do that. And of course, trashing and drawing cards is usually better than having a sifting card, but sometimes you don't get the choice. So that's it for Warehouse. So what we are going to do now is we are going to head over to the online client. We're going to generate some games that have Warehouse in it, and we're going to see how good this card is in this Kingdoms. Here for trashing, we have Lookout, and that's it. We have Ironworks that can be used to gain wishing wells and treasure maps and villages. Where is the draw? It is only wishing well. Ironworks can gain warehouses too, of course. So what do we do? There is no real draw here. Well, there is draw with a wishing well. It kind of stinks, but I think we do it anyway. We need to get rid of these coppers, which we're going to do with Lookout. and we can then try and Wishing Well, and we should be able to actually ironwork some treasure maps and smash them together to get some golds. And then I guess we're off at that point, right? Like, that's all we're trying to do. Like, the drawing is going to be hard. So we want to get thin, and we want to have a deck that's mostly just a bunch of golds and a bunch of Wishing Wells. That feels pretty good to me. A warehouse is probably going to be nice here. It will help set up the lookout when we start to get thin. And, yeah, like, it's also the case that it's easier to actually draw up your deck with Wishing Well if you've got, like, 3 cards in the discard and you make your way to the discard, because you know what those cards are, and sometimes you can actually like set up some final guaranteed Wishing Well draws. So yeah, I think what we're doing is we're just going to try and get a bit thin, get open lookout ironworks, try and gain Wishing Wells, and then at some point we're going to gain some treasure maps with ironworks. We're going to try and gain a bunch of golds, and then we might only just single province. There is plus buy with Courtier and Baron, but I don't know. On the other hand, it is quite easy to match up Baron with an estate when you have Warehouse, right? Like, it's very good for doing that. But what are you going to do with all that extra money? Like, you can hit 6 by doing that. You can buy golds directly, but I don't really care about these 5-cost cards. Like, there's 2, they're all gold gainers looking at it. Like, every single one of them is a gold gainer, and there's Ironworks Treasure Map as another gold gainer. There are 4 gold gainers on this board. Like, what are we even doing here? But I think getting thin and Wishing Well with, like, just mostly golds is going to be better than doing these. Like, maybe because it's just the only thing you're doing is gaining treasures. Like, maybe Bandit's actually a lot better. Maybe you just want a Bandit, right? But it doesn't feel like I can really make that much use out of plus buys on this kingdom. I'd rather ironwork stuff, so I think I'm going to do that. And Wishing Well, Treasure Map, Warehouse, Lookout, Ironworks. I think this is what I'm playing with. And Warehouse is okay here. I'm not opening with it because Lookout is better for what I need. But at some point it will be nice. And as I start adding provinces, and I'm quite thin and I've got some golds, I only need 3 golds in hand to hit province, or 2 golds and a silver, which I'll probably have. So I think Warehouse is going to be pretty good. So I like Warehouse in this game. Not opening with it, but I will get 1 at some point. Maybe I even get 2, right? I can play 2 Warehouses and get down to 3 golds for that 1 province per turn that I'm aiming for. Like, that could work. Here, I spot straight away Torturer, and there is a village. However, there is no trashing. Torture attack is going to be very important here because it gives curses, and there is no trashing outside of, like, mine, which is not real trashing. So, yeah, in that regard, like, Warehouse is sort of necessary to pair up the villages and the torturers. Like, it's really important to try and get this off. So I definitely like Warehouse here. Is Lurker good here? I think that we struggle to draw too much to make use of it, but it is worth noting there is no plus buy. I don't think I like Treasury in face of Torturer attacks. I was just wondering, does that help you to hit 5 consistently? What's the alternative? We've got Duchy Duke. Because the engine is tough here. Like, does Torturer destroy Duchy Duke? I don't think that it does. Maybe. You're going to have to take a bunch of curses, actually, because it can hurt you from hitting 5 on some turns, sorry. You wouldn't do Duchy Duke with moats. Like, no, it's terrible. Okay, so I think, yeah, we have to try and get a Torturer game off. So we're going to open Warehouse and Silver, and we're going to use that to try and hit 5 for Torturer. And then we're going to buy Mining Villages, Torturers, and Warehouses. And our hand size is probably not going to be very big because we keep knocking it down with Warehouse, but we really need to get off a bunch of Torturers. And I think that's how we win, right? We're going to try and destroy our opponent with that. There is no plus buy. We are aiming for 1 province per turn, but I think we can start to do it fairly consistently after a certain point. After that 1 silver, I'm not sure I actually want many other silvers, like, in my deck. I don't know how big my hand size is ever going to get, so maybe at some point I have to pick up some treasuries. Like, I think you can get this game to go on real long and basically stop the Duchy Duke player while doing that, so you could probably get away with some treasuries, or maybe a mine. That's probably what we do. We have to open a silver, but after that, we don't want more silvers. We're actually going to try and draw through and actually play a mine every turn while playing a torturer engine. And that's how we get up to 8, right? We just try and keep the number of stock cards over. So warehouse is really important here to actually make that work. There is no trashing, and so we just have to deal with using warehouse instead. And it's not as good as trashing, but it's fine, right? So warehouse is pretty good on this board. And I think we actually open it on this board as well. I think, yes. I suppose the alternative is smithy, right, instead of warehouse there, to try and hit 5. But, I don't know. I'd rather have warehouse. Here we have remodel as the only trashing. There is a shanty town as the only village. And there is a torturer engine. Unfortunately, remodel's real bad for dealing with curses and coppers here because there is nothing except a state at 2. So again, the torturer engine's going to be very powerful. Oh, there is island, I suppose. You can do that. Okay, so island's fine. So what we can do is we can remodel estates into islands and then island away coppers. Like, you could do that. But, man, Shantytown with Torturer, this is a much, much worse engine, right? Because it's Shantytown instead of a drawing village. Oh, there is Caravan to draw. There is Smithy. Secret Passage is another alternative. It's not quite sifting like Warehouse, but it's something else that can give you a bit of reliability. This is tricky to know how to play this one, actually. I think we have to Torturer because curses are just so horrible on this board. So we really want to be playing multiple Torturers, so we have to go for the crappy engine. You can go... I don't think I like Baron. I was just wondering, do I like Baron? I would like to eventually rather have a Courtier, I think, and reveal it to a Torturer if I'm going to get like a plus buy. I think a Courtier, not Courtier. Actually, Baron's probably okay. Maybe we don't have to trash all of our estates here, and we can eventually get a Baron. But I think I'm opening... Do I do Warehouse again? Do I open Remodel Warehouse? I don't know. Maybe that's bad. I'd like to open Remodel. What am I going to get with it? Like, I'm not hitting 5 if I do this. Like, there's no way. But there's also probably not going to happen if I Shantytown remodel. Maybe I just Shantytown remodel and I just hope they don't collide. That might be better. Or it is just silver remodel. Maybe I just have to do that. I really want the remodel, though, to start with. And I want to trash the estates. And I want to turn them into... Maybe I don't get islands straight away. Unless I really want to thin. Maybe you just have to thin. I just don't see you actually getting the Torturer chain going for a while. And your opponent is probably fine to just... like remodel estates into island and then play them to like get thin fast. Maybe that's what they have to do. And maybe you've got time to do that because just Shantytown Torturer is just not great. Like when you've got a load of junk. Yeah, I can see using Warehouse here because you are not getting completely thin, and especially if you have to get curses, like you really need Warehouse to try and make this work. So Warehouse seems good. I don't think I'm opening with it. I'm gonna try Shantytown and remodel, like, yeah, but maybe I just don't hit 5 for a little while, and that is actually okay, despite the fact the Torture engine's really good, just because I can't do Shantytown Torturer with a load of junk on its own, right? Like, I'm not getting a Torture engine off of it very quickly with that. So Warehouse seems good here. It seems good throughout, but I'm not opening with it. But I'm going to get one fairly soon, I think. Like, maybe I get a silver first before I get Warehouse. Like, it's not going to be like my second 3. Here we have replaces the only trashing. Oh no, and salvager. Well, this is kind of like the last board, isn't it, where you had remodel. However, there is havens, lurkers, lighthouses, pawns to gain instead. Like if you replace a copper into a 2 cost. Like, so there's a lot more going on here. There is no village, is the thing that I have spotted. So Lurker's pretty bad here. I think. Like, what am I going to gain with Lurker? Nothing. Like, I don't want it. I would... If I open 5-2, I'm opening Replace and Haven, I guess. Like, it seems more useful than Pawn here. Otherwise... Do I want a Warehouse Salvager? Like, Salvager's not a silver equivalent because you have to keep an estate and lose it, and it's both like giving you 1. But I don't care to hit 5. I'm actually going to use Salvager to thin a bit, and then I'm going to have a load of silvers. But if I'm doing that, Warehouse isn't very good, right? What's the draw? It's only a library, but like there's Haven, there's Wishing Well. Like, the draw is not great. But I still think it's important to get thin. If I do end up with a deck with a load of silvers, like there's Wishing Well, which can help me draw. Like, I have to use Salvager a lot and maybe Warehouse for that. Maybe I do just buy silver over and over, like, and I salvage. But like, I don't feel like I'm actually going to be hitting 8 if I do that. Maybe I don't trash at all. Maybe this is some kind of merchant ship, big money, library, big money. This board is just awful. What do you do here? Like, there are no good cards on here. Like, this does not make a functional deck. Wow. I don't know. I like the cursing of Replace. I think Replace is the card that I really want to be playing, and I'm buying silvers and golds, and I might replace some golds. I would rather not get Lighthouse, and I don't think I can give enough curses with Replace to actually make that like scary enough to go for Lighthouse. So I'm going to... Do I open Wishing Well Silver? Maybe that's what I do instead. Probably. Yeah, I guess so. I can replace estates into Wishing Wells, I can, or silvers. Yeah, you know what? You can Wishing Well and try and draw a bunch of coppers with some silvers. Like, you can do that too. You can replace into Havens. You can sort of start to get a little bit thin doing that. Maybe... Or you replace into Pawns, maybe better than Haven. But if you replace into Haven, you can start getting some reasonable turns, I guess. Like, this is a strange board. I'm just worried that all this stuff I'm doing is actually going to lose to like library big money or merchant ship big money. So maybe that's just it. Maybe it's just merchant ship big money, and I don't worry about any of the other stuff I'm thinking about. I could open one Salvager, like silver Salvager, and shift into merchant ship big money when I've got rid of my estates. That's probably it, thinking about it. So, merchant ship is bad, but there is always a board for it, and I think this is the one, like, because this is pretty poor. Warehouse, not actually that convinced by it. In that case, if it's just like a basic big money thing, like, it's probably fine, honestly. Like, it's fine if I do library big money. It's probably less fine if I do merchant ship big money, but you know what? You might be able to get use of one. Remember, merchant ship does give you money on your next turn as well. So I guess that's what it is. Warehouse is not very exciting here. I can see me buying one. I'm not opening with it. It's... right, like, it's just difficult, that board. Like, there's just not a lot happening. It's hard to get stuff to work. Right, last one. We have Salvager to trash, and technically mine-ish. I do see we have Artisan, and we got Native Village, we got Throne Room, we got Torturer, but there is also Lighthouse. Torturer is our draw here. We want to be playing it a lot. We've got Throne Room, we got Native Village. We can totally do it. We do want to Lighthouse at some point. Like, we've got a Lighthouse protect against the Torturer engine, so we're going to try and draw our whole deck so that we can play Lighthouse every turn. And we can Artisan for the Torturers when we get there, and we can Artisan to pick up Throne Rooms and Native Villages and Wishing Wells and a bunch of stuff. Is Warehouse good here? Warehouse is fine here, I suppose. Well, yeah, it's only okay here, Warehouse. Like, I'm going to try and get thin. I would rather open Salvager, and then I don't really want to open Warehouse because I'm not hitting 5. I'm going to open Salvager, and... I think I would prefer Wishing Well over Silver. I want to try and avoid stop cards at first. And hey, I'm going to get some silvers eventually for sure, but I would rather start like trashing stuff. So Salvager and Wishing Well, I think I open with. And a Warehouse is a card that can fit into this deck, but I'm not totally convinced that I'm actually going to get one for a while. It is worth noting that Wishing Well, when it whiffs, sets up Native Village to like get a bad card out of your hand. So you are going to actually get to be a little bit clean early on, and then at some point you're going to have to drop all of that junk back in your deck because you need to play Native Villages. For Torturer, unless you do Throne Room Wishing Well as your village, which you could totally do, that might be better. Like, maybe Native Village works better as a way to trash instead of Salvager, thinking about it. But I like the plus buy from Salvager here. It's the only plus buy. We're going to want one, and we can pick up Lighthouse and Native Village like on certain turns, right? Just start grabbing those. Lighthouse will actually help us hit 5 a little bit, but we're not going to open with it. We don't need to. But as soon as, like when we play Salvager, like if we hit 4 with a Salvager turn, we pick up a Lighthouse and a Native Village, and then we get another Lighthouse at some point with the Salvager buy. Like, we can do that. So yeah. Warehouse is only okay here. It's fine later on, but it actually doesn't seem like that great a board for Warehouse. There's draw that I would rather have early on. I'm going to get thin. Like, there's decent draw with Torturer, and there's an Artisan to get like Throne Rooms. I don't think I'm really going to have that many problems on this board. Like, Throne Room is going to be super great. So I think this is a pretty poor board for Warehouse, honestly. I might not get one. Right, there you go. That was 5 Kingdoms. As you can see, Warehouse was decent on a bunch of them. Like, it's not super powerful. It's a fairly average card, I guess, but sometimes it's really good, and there's various reasons why you want it. It's not that bad to have in your deck, but be careful with it. Like, don't get too many. Like, it's good. It's much better than Cellar. Well, anyway, I hope that was useful for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.